Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Silicon Labs product podcast. This episode is the first in a series that will cover the year ahead in 2021. We'll look at the different markets and applications in the IoT. I hope you'll join me as we'll both learn what are the developing needs and technologies addressing these different spaces. Today, I'm joined by Alex Kepsel. He's the segment marketing manager for building automation at Silicon Labs. Thanks, Alex, for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Yeah, it's been about a year. You joined me last year, and we had sort of a kickoff to what you were working on in building automation. So I think our topic today will be timely.
Yes, crazy 12 months already. I know thinking back, we were all wondering what the heck COVID was and where we're going, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, in that last episode, you were talking about those new challenges that companies were facing due to the pandemic. And so now, here we are 12 months later. Why don't you talk about what you've seen develop because of the pandemic, some of the things that have driven building automation, demand and requirements?
Sure. Yeah, I think, 12 months ago when this all started in March, I think the key word I thought of was uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty around what is COVID, what are the economic effects, how does that affect buildings and building owners, how do they respond to that, especially with an injured economy, right? How do they pay for keeping the buildings running as no one's there? And obviously the economy was in a downturn. I think now definitely there's still uncertainty. None of us know when COVID's going to end. Maybe we should all take bets on it. That'd be kind of fun. But there is some certainty definitely around what is happening in buildings and commercial buildings and in terms of IoT. And you could probably guess the main focus that's really come to the forefront is health, the health of the building, the health of the employees. How do we monitor that? Those kinds of things. And monitor and keep equipment running with the whole work from home that's become more permanent. So just kind of actually to make this a little bit more concrete and for our listeners, I read a survey recently that's kind of interesting. So Johnson Controls surveyed 150 of their commercial customers last year in a COVID-19 pulse survey. So if you just go Google, Johnson Controls COVID-19 pulse survey, it'll come up. It's a public survey. They found that most of their customers had planned to make changes with new equipment or processes around energy management, energy efficiency, and monitoring the health of their building. And some of that, so what does that mean? That's kind of your question. I'm sure everyone's wondering, what does that mean from an IoT or application perspective? Some of that's non-IoT or not as sexy as you might think. It's just new processes, right? New processes for how you clean your building, maybe adding more filters in there where you need filters in the ventilation system. But a lot of it is IoT driven. So a good example is they found that having proper ventilation in a building does help, not just with getting COVID or reducing the risk of COVID, but just disease in general and helping people be more productive while they're in the building. So, monitoring CO2 levels, putting a lot of sensors in buildings for CO2 levels. Another example is cleaning the air, not just with filters like we have in our home that we replace every month or two, whatever, but kind of more fancy ionization filters. You've probably heard of contact tracing. That's definitely something that we see with using people's phones or BLE beacon devices that they carry around or that kind of thing. And then remote monitoring is another big thing. Obviously, the dynamic of and behaviors of buildings have changed so much over the last year. Just kind of knowing what's going on in certain rooms. For example, we've seen a lot of customers deploy sensors in like bathrooms for bathroom equipment and towel dispensers and things like that. So maybe someone doesn't have to go walk around the building if they don't have to. They only go service a part of the building if it really needs service. So that's definitely a huge demand that's kind of on the uptick. And then another thing too is like in thermal imaging, right? There's even some fancy things with using cameras to do thermal imaging to detect, if someone has a fever that they're developing or if there's hot spots in buildings, things like that. And so there's a lot of trends around building health, not just in HVAC sensor, but things like access to buildings. I could go on, but hopefully that helps paint a high level picture of some of the major trends that are evolving over the last 12 months.
Yeah, thanks. Just as you were bringing those, it just brings to mind all those instances when I go into these restaurants or buildings and I see the dispensers empty and I see the towel dispenser in it. To your point, it's like now in the age that we live in, it's like the automation and the ability to put some intelligence behind that will greatly help these companies in these buildings. So
Yep.
Another thing is that poll you talked about. If you give me the link, I'll put it in the description of the podcast. So our listeners, if you guys just go to the podcast details, you'll be able to go and review the poll that Alex just mentioned. So you talked about building health. I hadn't heard that a lot, but one of the things you mentioned was like building access, and we just talked about some of the maintenance. How, Silicon Labs is a great wireless SoC company and software provider. How do you see customers using our Bluetooth or our wireless solutions to meet these challenges that you just talked about?
Yeah. So building health, one kind of subsegment of that is monitoring healthy and simple and kind of digital access to buildings. And it all kind of fits in because think about it, one of the big emphasis right now is who's entering the building and where do they go, and managing that with a digital system, a software system that's centralized, not having not just a paper trail, but a digital paper trail of that is one of the biggest trends that's now accelerating. I think we've already seen in the past, some companies today, like HID Global is a good example. That's, one of the world leaders in badges to get into buildings and RFID cards and things. They already have products out there with Bluetooth, but COVID's really accelerated that. And, it's gaining the insights of where those people, who's entering, where they're going, enabling cleaner access, so less physical touching of doors and things like that, improving the experience. I think another challenge is as you're upgrading systems, not losing sight of the human-centric part of it. You obviously don't want to make it more complicated. You want to make it easier for both the consumer or building inhabitant and the installer or the building manager. And then another challenge too is security. Obviously, as you're updating things and adding more connectivity and more data flows throughout buildings, how do you do that in a secure way with data privacy, IP protection, and a whole long list of other things and threats that are coming up right now? And as you said, yeah, Silicon Labs, that's right in our wheelhouse because, Bluetooth, security, connectivity, those are all core parts of our strategy in our portfolio. I think Bluetooth is a really great solution for mobile access or clean access into buildings because one, it's pervasive. All of us have right here with us BLE devices in our pockets or on our table, right? Our smartphones, most of the developed world has these. So we've got Bluetooth almost pretty much everywhere we go. Second is it's flexible. I think the days are gone where Bluetooth is just for headsets. It's now has longer range, lower power, can enable mesh, can enable things like asset tracking and indoor navigation. So Bluetooth has come a long way as something that's not just a point-to-point audio streaming technology. The third is it's low power. So, this is great for users, for us, for our phones to have long battery life, but even in buildings, there's things like the LED certifications, buildings are trying to get their energy down. So low power sensors and things like that are great. And then lastly, security. I wouldn't say Bluetooth solves the security problem on its own. It definitely is a piece of the equation. And, having a secure communication protocol, which Bluetooth can do with encryption and frequency hopping and things like that, is a piece of the puzzle. But I wouldn't say Bluetooth is the only piece there. There's obviously things that are surrounded, but in general, kind of putting all those things together, yeah, we're finding that our BLE software and hardware, our SoCs, are finding their way into these building access products. So hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I see it all the time. Our buildings downtown Austin, we just recently redid our building access, and I know that they made changes just in the last year. And I'm sure that new security system, a new access system, allowed them to implement some of these requirements.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, COVID's accelerated or brought a lot of these into focus, but this is something that is going to solve a problem even for years to come post-COVID, right? Because losing your ID badge is something that happens even before COVID and happens all the time. It's annoying to have to carry a badge around with you. So I feel like moving to Bluetooth access with your phone just makes sense in general, is a really good thing that's kind of accelerated. So,
well, we talked a little bit about this last year, and it's top of my mind. I'm fascinated with building automation, and so what have you seen over the last year as far as customer development and really when you go to those customers, they're talking about these new projects that they're working on. I'm talking about like, these large buildings, and you drive by at night and the lights are all on, right? I would think that now in this, pandemic era, that people would want to have, rooms shut lights off. They'd want conference rooms to, power up only when somebody's inside of it. Heating. I mean, gosh, even just your heating and ventilation, you could probably make huge reductions in cost if you had some intelligent building controls. What do you see just as far as new design starts and new requests for solutions for those types of solutions?
Well, as you're kind of alluding to, as you said, the two biggest kind of consumers of energy in a building are lighting and HVAC. That's probably 75% of the utility in a building. So those are really where building owners focus. And when you move to LED lighting, that in itself is a huge upgrade. But then once you add the smart lighting on top of that, and for HVAC, not just updating your equipment from the equipment that was installed 20, 30 years ago. Obviously, we've made a lot of just energy improvements or efficiency improvements over the last 30 years. But having that intelligent now tied in with sensors like PR sensor, motion sensors, as you alluded to, why would the lights be on if no one's in the building? Why would a certain room be enabled or have air flowing into it if no one's in that room? So those kinds of things, detecting and having some intelligence of who's in the room or is someone in the room, that's definitely a key growth area. That was even kind of on the ramp up, it was ramping up before COVID, but is even more important now, again, as the behavior of buildings has changed over the last 12 months. So that's a big one. Another one where we see really a huge opportunity is sub-metering, monitoring these things inside buildings, monitoring plug loads, monitoring circuit breakers, and what the actual loads are consuming is something that's happened over the last 3-4 years and is still continuing to grow with wireless, is a big enabler of that. And then another one I kind of mentioned earlier, but the bathroom equipment, I know it's kind of a niche example and an interesting one, but I think monitoring equipment to make more efficient processes. So again, not having to send someone to walk around the building to service something if it doesn't need to be serviced, or predictive maintenance is another big one. Is an equipment like a big HVAC central unit or an elevator kind of on its dying days? Does it need a service person to go out and service it before it breaks? Those are definitely all things that are growing in double digit, year-on-year growth right now.
Okay. And you just brought it up. So I want to ask this follow-up question about metering. You had mentioned prior about a company that you were working with that was using our Zigbee technology to monitor their switch, their power deployment panel. And I was like, Alex, you're full of it. Why would anybody use a home automation protocol like Zigbee? And you said, no, Kyle, they're using it for isolation purposes. And the light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, that's right. You can use Zigbee to sense and then wirelessly communicate, and you're basically isolating those huge, large power domains. Talk about that type of a solution, or maybe that customer. Where do you see the ramp up in wireless for isolation and for high power measurement and metering?
Yeah, that is without mentioning the customer name, but you might be able to just find it online. But yeah, they're using Zigbee to detect voltage, current, power factor, all those things on really large like data centers, right? Where you've got a lot of energy being consumed, or even in other commercial buildings like our Silicon Labs office, we've got energy distribution panels in there. So detecting the voltage, current to monitor, okay, which pieces of the building or parts of the pieces of equipment are consuming the most energy. And then you can make changes. The building owner can make intelligent changes to maybe we shouldn't even have this on overnight, or, things like that to be more efficient with their energy consumption. And then it can detect faults too. So you don't have to walk around the building and look at things. You can see that from a central cloud dashboard to see what's running, what's not, and detect things like that. The reason wireless is so valuable, especially Zigbee, one, wireless is easy to retrofit. So a lot of these sensors that exist today are wired mostly with like Modbus, kind of RS-45 protocol, but that's a lot of cables. Some of these data centers have, there could be thousands of distribution power lines in a single circuit breaker panel. So having to do that would be a rat's nest of a installment, so wireless makes that super easy and cheaper, less material. Also parts, a lot of our EFR32 are multi-protocol. So not only would you use Zigbee for the networking and collecting the data, but you could use the Bluetooth to set it up, connection to your phone. So the installer has a mobile app that they configure and provision that, and then it switches over to Zigbee and it starts collecting that data. And then the last thing, and I think also what you're asking is why would they use a home automation technology like Zigbee? That's because green power, there's this part of Zigbee called green power that's specifically for really ultra low power, coin cell battery or even energy harvesting type devices. And what's cool about these electric submeters or circuit breakers is a lot of times they can actually harvest energy from the magnetic field. These tend to be, AC waves, fairly high voltage for me, Silicon Labs, anything above 3.3 volts is high voltage for us. That's not the same for, the ABBs and Schneiders and Siemens of the world, but they can kind of harness that magnetic field to generate some energy and actually power that sensor that collects the voltage and current and all that stuff. So really cool application, and definitely seeing these going wireless over the next decade.
Yeah,
so.
that's crazy. And like I said, that was what really excited me on our last conversation. I got a new one for you, Alex. I just had a podcast with the CEO of Edge Impulse, Zach Shelby.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting talking to him. And he's talking about, using embedded machine learning, or in his case, a tiny ML, into these really small, like you just mentioned, wireless SoCs that are super efficient, but yet they are able to really embed intelligence into these remote devices to provide, maintenance prediction, just, fault detection, things like that could really help with some of your building automation things. Have you started to see customers that you engage requesting information on machine learning? Have you started to see this interest? Because it was new to me until I started researching it for the last podcast. What have you seen with machine learning in your market?
Yeah, it's really just getting started. We've had some lead customers, getting into some conversations with them on what they're looking for and what we can offer. That's definitely going to grow even more over the next year. We're super excited to be working with Edge Impulse and companies like that who can really add a lot of value to our SoCs and our hardware. I'd say the use cases I see the most for commercial buildings and the interest around artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's a few. So you could guess, we talked a lot about energy efficiency. That's definitely one. Kind of applying AI and ML to predicting building patterns. Your home has a pretty distinct signature day to day, especially as we work from home in terms of the energy you consume. Commercial buildings are a little bit less predictable. So applying some real high level intelligence to that to start to monitor energy and actually kick on the thermostat before you need it at the right moments is something that where AI ML can help. Process efficiency is another one. Predictive maintenance. So I mentioned, an elevator breaking down or a piece of equipment breaking down. That can actually be prevented with AI ML at the end node when you start to do like vibration sensing and sound sensing. You can actually, sometimes the way equipment sounds can start to, give a sense of is it going to break soon? Other things like safety and security. So facial recognition, sound profiling, did glass break, something like that, is a dog barking, whatever it is. That's probably more of a home use case than a commercial building, but you get the point. Tamper detection is something else that you can detect with AI ML. And then the last one, I can keep going, but another cool one is voice control. Obviously a lot of us have voice assistants in our home, but think about even going into a building and just as you walk into a bathroom or door, saying door open, open door for me, or saying something, and it just does that, rather than having to physically put your hand on the door and open it or turn on the lights or whatever. So there's definitely a lot of use cases here. Not all of it is going to happen in the end node. Some of this obviously is going to happen in a Linux gateway or in the cloud, but it's definitely more efficient sometimes to do this at the end node, like the predictive maintenance example, where you can just do the vibration sensing at the edge and you don't need to be constantly transmitting all that data to the cloud. It just doesn't make sense from a data plan perspective and from a power consumption perspective. So lots of exciting stuff here. I think we can all geek out on this for a while. Really cool stuff that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that we haven't even seen yet, Alex, and you're gonna this 2021, you gave us what you see, but it's going to be amazing to maybe regroup at the end of the year and see the things that you didn't expect, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things brought to your attention, a lot of our customers that are asking for things that even Silicon Labs has not even thought of. So excited to revisit with you later.
Yeah, let's touch base again. Hopefully not 12 months. Let's do sooner, and I'll keep you guys updated and all of our listeners update on major trends or new launches that we have that fit into commercial buildings. Would love to share that news with everyone.
Well, great. Well, thanks again, Alex. It was great spending time with you. Thanks to our listeners for downloading the podcast and joining us. And as I mentioned at the start of this is one of a series. So look forward to other conversations with Alex's counterparts, and we'll dive into some other markets and applications. And hopefully these podcasts will help you understand where Silicon Labs fits and where Silicon Labs can help you with your designs and your products. Until next time, everyone, thank you and stay safe.